Everyone, welcome to what will be the last round of Ken Reed's episodes until November. It does feel like the final countdown. And this is going to be a really good letter reading because this one has a lot of very explicit, relevant themes and issues that a lot of people who date avoidant attachers are very familiar with. Can't wait to dive into it. Now, before I go in, just want to make a few announcements. First is, for those of you who are interested in submitting a letter for the November batch, you're very welcome to submit your letter now, as it is now open. Letters are 125 Australian dollars for a reading, and it'll be done just like this. And the word count's increased too from 500 to 2,000 words, so have at it. And also, I'm going to be away from tomorrow for a week till October the 28th. There will be some old content that's just being reposted while I'm away. But other than that, if you are looking to work with my team, please contact them as I won't be available over the week. But if you have any messages for me, feel free to email me and I will get back to you when I can, when I return. Right, with all that admin out of the way, let us get into Serena's letter. So, Serena writes, hello, thank you for being awesome. My letter is as follows. I'm in pain and disbelief right now. I met my fearful avoidant guy online. An intense emotional contact, phone calls, messages for a month. Have you ever watched Love is Blind? Yeah, it was something like that. But we saw some pictures of each other. And what I meant is, by Love is Blind, is it was super intense connection even though we hadn't met. I think this is a very familiar experience for a lot of people who date online. We had great banter, there was passion, there was sweet goodnight texts, the whole 9 yards. We live far away from each other. Oh, here we go. I'm just pausing here to say long distance and fearful avoidance, or avoidance in general, that is a recipe for fear of intimacy and foreseeable problems. We live far away from each other. On the 2-week mark, he had a small meltdown where he didn't know what he wanted. When I asked more, he confessed he hadn't expected our great sudden connection, that he felt scared and unworthy of it. He had ended his last relationship for similar reasons. He always felt self-loathing. He said I would leave him anyway eventually. Anyways, we rode out that storm. I offered him security with my calm affection. I also said I noticed he needed space at times, that it was okay for him to take that. That he appreciated that so much. We continued with the same bliss as before. We became even closer. After a couple weeks more intense lovey-dovey contact, I made the fatal mistake of mentioning that I didn't know where we stood in our relationship. He answered very aloof, well, I don't know, it's just nice getting to know you. When questioned if that's all he felt, he suddenly couldn't say anything else even remotely about the subject, let alone his feelings. He couldn't even say, I like you. He agreed when I asked, so your feelings haven't grown at all? This shocked me after that whole month of us basically acting like we were a couple in love. I felt forced by him and my own dignity to break up, since he basically admitted to having no feelings for me. He was totally okay with my goodbye, showed no emotion, said he was sorry. Gee, thanks. When I reached out again, only once after a week to clarify and say I missed him, he said sorry again, but claimed he wasn't in a place for something serious now, if ever. I said goodbye, even though he offered friendship. I was so crushed. I simply refused to believe how he could have gone so completely cold suddenly over the span of 1 day. From super hot sweet in the morning to nothing. In an afternoon, and the only trigger was I asked him to verbalize a little bit about our obvious connection. I'm now asking myself, as well as you can, the 3 burning questions. 1, did he ever care? Why else would he have thousands of messages between us? 2, could he back up and regret all of this like boomerang avoidance? 3, what to say if he pops back up? I can't afford to let this person hurt me again. My heart simply can't take it. I was truly falling in love. Okay, Serena, thank you very much for this very relatable letter. Okay, before I even answer your questions, let's just start out with this by saying I'm really sorry that you've gone through this, because this is a situation that I think happens for a lot of people with dating online in particular, where, you kind of match with someone who looks the part, you're into them, and then you have this really intense online connection where you're having a pseudo relationship, or even, if I'm being cheeky, textuationship online. And it's then exacerbated by the fact that you're both in remote parts of the country. And I think that for a lot of avoidant attachers, they tend to benefit from this dynamic for obvious reasons, because it allows them to maintain space. Their fear of intimacy isn't activated. And I think that it's very dangerous at times when particularly that distance is a relevant factor in a budding online relationship. I've got nothing wrong with dating apps in theory, but I do think that you've just got to be careful of how that can play into it. And I think with this guy, it seems to me like even when you cross that bridge and you started to get together and know him more intimately, it seems like, he continued to be very romantic with you, but as soon as you asked about the connection, it was over. And that was it. And I think it's really interesting to note how this guy, as you said it, had a meltdown where he said, I don't know what I want, I don't feel like I'm good enough for you. And then subsequently, when you asked him about the connection, once again, he didn't know what he was looking for, despite the fact that he was acting like he wanted to be with you. Now, when I say acting, I want to make it clear. I don't mean that he was doing this for show. I don't think this was a case of him trying to screw you around. I don't think it was a case of him being like a classic fuckboy. I think that it's just one of those things that it's really important to understand that when it comes to a lot of these individuals, particularly fearful avoidant attachers, I think they're people who just quite literally go with the flow being their emotions. They're looking for intense, Hollywood-esque style feelings, but they're not committed to reality. And reality is boring, and boredom is death for a fearful avoidant who's got a dysregulated nervous system. And I think that for this guy, he really enjoyed the chase, the thrill, and just what you were doing without actually being like, this is now a relationship. And the fact that he couldn't even identify any emotions for you suggests a number of things. One, he could be alexithymic, meaning he doesn't know how he really feels and he can't connect with his emotions. Two, he may be someone who was in this experience where he was really just interested in the fantasy and the idea of this, but then when reality hit, he freaked the hell out. And finally, you asked the question, well, did he ever really like me? Especially given the fact that he had been messaging me so much throughout this experience. I think he was definitely invested and interested. Like, I don't think that he was just trying to, get sex out of you. I don't think he was trying to basically take advantage of you or, do something where he was trying to exploit you from like a very intentional place. I think the vibe that I get from this guy is that he was chasing feelings. And one of those feelings might have been a bit of immature fantasy love for you. But I think that at the end of the day, he has hard barriers and fear to connection. Because the minute that you said, I just want to gently ask, where are we going and what are we doing? He shut down. And he shut down really hard. And he still tried to friend zone you and keep you around. So to me, when I hear this, I think this is a guy who is not capable of a relationship. I mean, the guy said it himself. He doesn't think he'll ever be in a relationship. And if I've got to be honest, sounds like one of the avoidant attachers I dated back in the day. A lot of them think, I just don't think I'll ever be in a relationship before bouncing into a new one. Many of them in those moments where they're shutting down and they convince themselves, I just don't know what I want. I don't think I'm the right person for you. You're better than me. They're in a really bad freeze response much of the time. They're throwing their hands up, they're giving up, and they're really looking for a way out of this situation because they're freaking out. They'll come up with anything in that moment just to allow themselves to create space and distance because they can't handle the distress in their system from being that close to someone. So I think that you are probably safe to, not to sound crass, but to fuck around and find out with this guy. But the minute that, things started to become a bit more real, that was when it was going to be GG, game over, end of that story. Which is unfortunate because it does seem like there was some good stuff there too between the two of you. And it's just sad. I think that this is something I just want to say for anyone on the insecure attachment spectrum. Dating avoidance is hot. I know it doesn't always end that way, but dating these individuals, they often present and put up such a good front and image, in the first place. They're very good with impression management, particularly the fearful avoidance, that frankly, the intensity and the chemistry is very engaging. So of course you probably had a really intense, hot, great online dating experience that then translated reasonably well when you got together, Serena. But it's just one of those things where it's kind of sad that, they just can't go beyond being able to have, at best, a superficial level of attraction for someone and connection. You probably got further with him than anyone else probably has. And even if he commits to a long-term relationship, guarantee it's probably not going to have a lot of intimacy in it because it's just too much for these individuals. Their capacity is quite small compared to yours. So that's the answer to your first question. Then you ask me another question here too, which was, could he pop back up like a boomerang avoidant? My answer is absolutely. Like, honestly, I can't guarantee for certain whether he will. I know Dr. Sarah Hensley, the dating decoder, has her own theory on this. She argues that some avoidants are far more likely to get back in touch with you the longer they've known you, to which my answer is I don't necessarily agree with that. In my experience, some avoidants have come back depending on their life circumstances, and it's not because they've necessarily known you for longer. It's just because, you're available, they're bored, lonely, depressed, and you just happen to be around. So it really depends, I think, on their mental and emotional well-being at the time, their coping mechanisms, what's happening around them. And if they don't have many of those resources to support them, then usually I find they're turning back around. And I will say, I find that for fearful avoidant attachers, particularly those that are in pretty bad episodes of mental health where they're struggling, oh yeah, they'll probably come back around more likely because often they feel like they're drowning and they look for any life raft in this case being you, to feel a sense of external validation for themselves. So that's why I would say just bear in mind that, with these particular individuals, I would say that the chances of them coming back around, the chances of them boomeranging really depends from individual to individual. I can't give you an exact answer and say, this person is absolutely going to boomerang back around to you, but I would say that given the fact that, this person is reasonably self-loathing based on the information you've shared, given the fact that this individual has also demonstrated that he enjoys intensity and, romance without the intimacy piece, he could hook you up if he's not feeling particularly good. But I can't say for certain whether he would come back around. You know what, Serena, if you are ever keen to tell me where you're at right now, I'd love to hear what's happened, because usually, now people who've gone through this will know what I'm talking about because they know this is the thing. Sometimes when you start to finally disconnect and heal and you're starting to move on and you're like, yep, wish them all the best but don't want to see them again, that's when they come back around. It's like, they sense that you're leaving their orbit and they just circle back around. It's nuts. I've experienced it. A lot of my clients have experienced it. It is one of those things where, it is one of those things where they do come back around, and it depends entirely, I think, on where they're at. I can see someone here's written, that is my letter. He did come back only for the ego stroke. Thanks. There you go. So if that is you, Serena, and you're the one talking to me, I just want to say, there you go. I predicted it. I find this stuff so validating. I know it might seem like this is a very salacious space where we're having a little bit of gossip about our exes and I'm making money by bashing people who've done badly to us. But the reality is that, I'm in survival mode, making a profit out of it. And if these people are going to continue to behave like idiots and I can predict it from a mile away, oh well, so be it. But yeah, I do think though that, just to be serious though for a second, I do think that it does suggest that this guy definitely was looking for external validation in that moment if he came back around. And, if you were available for it, you were. But in any case, good on you if you were ultimately like, I don't want to proceed with this, Serena. Now, finally, you ask me, well, you probably can answer this now. What do I say if he pops back up? I can't afford to let this person hurt me again. My heart simply can't take it. I was truly falling in love. Okay, well, Serena, since you're in the chat, if you want to share your answer as to what you did say, you're very welcome. Now, if it were me, if it was one of these exes that I went out with, I would be very honest and say, like, why now? Like, seriously, why now are you reaching back out to me? So, to me, I would be like, I just don't feel safe. I'd probably be like, look, I really appreciate the fact that you have fondness enough to want to reach back around. Truly, it means a lot, and it's very validating, especially considering the way things were left, because I got the impression that you weren't that interested. But in saying that, the way you left me was devastating. Now, in theory, I'm open to chatting about it to hear your side of what happened, but I am not looking to go for round 2. And I'll tell you why, as a professional in this space. I've heard, if any of you are regular listeners to this, if any of you listen to these stories, I listen to these stories every day at work. I've become so crusty and hopeless to these situations. Of course, I'm not going to go back there. I'm like, no. Even though there is a part of me that is sometimes a bit curious and is like, kind of curious. Do you know what it is? For me, it's almost like curiosity to sort of play around with my intuition to be like, I just almost want to confirm what's going to happen if I do go back now, just to sort of validate and be like, I knew it. Because often when we're left without a lot of information off the back of a situationship, we're sort of starved of details and can only make best guesses. But I can see here Serena's written, I told him not to contact me again. It hurt me too much. He's been silent since then, and I'm healing now. Thanks for the support. There you have it. Serena's done an excellent job, probably better than I would. But I think that, look, generally my answer is, I would say I'd be one part of me is a little bit curious. Another part of me would just be like, no way. Like a huge part of me, in fact, is just like, no way. Absolutely not. And also, I'm now very versed in avoidant speak. So I feel like if I were to have a reunion with this person, I'd probably feel quite insulted and just like, you haven't learned a thing. And a lot of you people who are listening to this, even watching my videos and applying yourself to the frameworks of attachment theory, hell, even just learning about relationship skills, would know that, there's growth to be found after these experiences. So chances are you've grown, as probably you have, Serena, and you're probably a very different person to who you were when you dated this individual. You've learned a lot. You don't want to be put through that experience again. And I have to say, on behalf of those who have gone for round 2, it's disgusting. And I have to say, to what one person here has written, Serena, everyone knows that what you did was super hard. It was probably very hard to say that, but hell, you did it. I want to just echo that and say congratulations. On behalf of everyone here, well done. Because, on behalf of myself, I should say, seriously, well done to you, because it can be bloody hard to break free from a cycle, especially a situationship. Because when you're dealing with boomerang avoidant attaches, the danger of going through that experience again is that it then becomes very addictive. And as I've said on record, fearful avoidants who are boomeranging are far harder to disengage with than dismissive avoidants who do a one and done. And so that's why I just think that if you can, opt out, have your boundaries and be like, no, because that destroyed me, I think you're doing the right thing for yourself and for everyone involved. Because ultimately it just puts you in a position to be like, no, I can't go through that again. It hurt too much. The way that happened just really hurt me. And I'm also reclaiming my voice. I'm also just saying like, this isn't good for me. And I really want to protect myself off the back of this. So yeah. So Serena, I just want to say thank you for submitting this letter and also sharing your experience with your fearful avoidant attacher in this situationship. It's not actually, this is the first time I've done a letter where I've explicitly talked about an online situationship with a fearful avoidant. Like I know a lot of you probably matched your avoidant attacher via a dating app, but it's not every day that I talk about a situationship that really blossomed in that first month where it was almost exclusively online and there were already patterns of shutting down, abrupt endings. Oh, I can't give you what you're looking for. Or in this case, he was saying, oh, I'm just not good enough for you, which is, again, a very common fearful avoidant thing to say. And I think this one is definitely fearful avoidant. I know you've said this, Serena, in your letter, but when you're hearing someone tell you how much they don't like themselves and they don't think they're going to be in a relationship, that's hopelessness right there. That's depression. That's someone who does not have a lot of self-efficacy, and they certainly don't think that they're looking for a solution to this problem. One thing that my colleague Laura from Quit Dating Idiots and I said on a live earlier in the week was, hey, well, if avoidant attachers know you can do better, why don't they want to be better? You can hear it in this guy's voice. He's just like, oh, I don't think I'll ever be in a relationship. They're quite literally giving up on you because they think it's too hard and they feel like it's just too much work for them to actually do that. And even if a lot of them know they need to change, they need to work on it, the thought of that change starts to trigger that hopelessness inside of them because they feel like, oh, it's too overwhelming. It's too much. I just can't do this. So yeah, that's what I'd say is something to consider. I can see someone here has asked, do dismissive avoidants typically say they aren't good enough too, or is that more of a fearful avoidant trait? Hard to say with accuracy for your case, because what I've found is that fearful avoidants are more explicit with their low self-esteem. Dismissive avoidants are more implicit, meaning that they don't show it. They're much more like, oh, I'm fine. This is just the way that I am. They often have a lot of very big, strong psychological defenses where they have what I call a superficial, apparent self-esteem, where they think that they're quite on top of the world, aloof and fine. But fearful avoidance, on the other hand, almost wear their low self-esteem on their sleeve, and it almost becomes a bit of, self-deprecation to show off and be like, oh, the reason I'm funny is because of my trauma, and so on. And they'll often have a lot of lines and banter about how, they're such an idiot, they're a piece of shit. And at times you might be like, oh, that's cute. You're not really. Let me nurture you. But if you're actually aware of what self-esteem is, and when someone's self-deprecating, it stops being funny and cute and modest and actually becomes a bit of a red flag, at least for me, where it's like, you're like, that's actually kind of gross. Like, if you actually don't think that you're worth it, I've got to be completely honest, why would I date you? Like, if you really don't think you're worthy, then how the hell are you going to think that you're capable of stepping up to be in a relationship? So that's why I often find fearful avoidant attachers are far more likely to come out with self-deprecating one-liners that really do illustrate how they really view and evaluate themselves. All right, I have 13 minutes before I need to run and go and see Olivia Rodrigo at a concert. I'll be happily celebrating the end of this chapter of work before I come back to work in a week, and also belting it out because Olivia has done a great service to those of us who've been broken up with by avoidance. So, for those of you who've got questions for me, feel free to throw them in the question mark box below, and let's do some Q und A. All right, let's do this. So, my avoidant ex-husband came back and is asking me to marry him again. I don't know how to react. Advice. Okay, I'm going to throw this to the chat. Chat, this individual has an avoidantly attached ex-husband wanting to come back and get married again. What would you do in the circumstances with the information you know? And even though we may not know this individual specifically, love to hear your thoughts and feelings on this, as I will happily read out what you say if it's appropriate. Here's my answer to this. I don't know your fearful avoidant, Jesus. I don't know your avoidantly attached husband, but what I will say as someone who's worked with cases like this is that is a dangerous, slippery slope. This person's already deactivated and shut down and run away from you. I personally would think this is a very dangerous spot. I can see someone who's written run. Another person's asking, how much therapy have you done? I would completely agree with that question. I've got to be honest, I think it's dangerous. I think it's really dangerous. Someone here says, ask what work has been done in the time you've been apart. I completely agree. Someone here's written, there needs to be a contractual obligation to go to therapy twice a week. I'm going to say 5 times a week. Someone here has written, run like the wind. Stop being the caretaker for everything. You deserve being taken care of too. Love that answer. Another person here has asked, what has changed? What work have you done? So, I'm going to share the sentiment of what the chat's saying. I personally think even if you weren't married, it is dangerous to go back. I actually think it's harder when you're married because if you've got a lot of shared resources, finances, and I got to be honest, if you've got kids, well, that's going to make things even trickier because when you are sharing custody for children and also the family's now broken up with and has also now suffered betrayal trauma as a consequence of this behavior, you may want to appease the children to try and come back together and to try and make it all work out for their sake. I'm going to just tell you what that'll do to you. It will eat you alive. It will make you feel like, you'll say to yourself in the beginning, it will be better for me if I don't have to face the distress of this for their sake. I think I can put up with being unhappy just to make it work for them. What you're saying in that moment is that what I'm going through right now is incredibly hard. I feel incredibly guilty at the idea of separating my kids from their husband or wife or whoever it is that, you're with. And I don't feel like a good person if my family were to be broken. You are probably taking on way too much accountability and responsibility for the other person's behavior. And as I've said to people in this situation, you do need to think about yourself first in this position. Not your kids. Yes, they're important too, but therapy is available for them to help them recover off the back of this. You do need to think about yourself as a huge priority because if you go back into this situation, what you're modeling for your children is potentially going back to a hostile environment where another sudden breakup could happen and you'll be walking on eggshells and they'll be learning that for themselves. Now, that is generally what I would be pointing out. It's not advice that I always give to clients. If you're in a position where it's just too impossible and you've got to, co-parent together and come back to each other, you might want to have a very strong mental health team to support you through this because it's going to be one of those things where even if this person is coming back and promising to give you the world, hell, if they're behaving how you've always wanted them to behave now, when before they were just being hot and cold and not acting like they gave a damn, then I'm going to tell you now that when you get back together, that's going to happen again. They're not suddenly going to be this person they're making themselves out to be. And as this person says, protect yourself, protect your kids, and protect your home. I completely agree. I do think that this is one of those things where you've just got to be very careful of what you're getting yourself back into. But I am not your counselor. This is me just running an edutainment section. I don't know your case completely. But I think when you're married, that's when things become even trickier. And if you don't have kids and you're not sharing resources, a little bit easier to navigate. But personally, I think you really should speak to someone about this as a professional. Hell, speak to one of my team members. We're no stranger to co-parenting arrangements and also navigating marriage and kids. Please feel free to reach out to one of my team if you want to go through it. But I got to tell you, if you're married to an avoidant attacher who's just broken up with you and wants to return straight away, I think in many ways it's potentially going to be very, very complicated. I can see someone here has actually asked a really interesting question. Is there a link between being a fearful avoidant and depression? Or could he have misinterpreted his symptoms due to could he have misinterpreted his symptoms due to his attachment style? Well, here's the funny thing with another diagnosis, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So usually in my experience, I find when people have CPTSD, which is, the basis for these insecure attachments, a lot of people do have an underlying theme of depression going on, or one that they may not even be aware of. It may not be like the overt depression where someone is just feeling like overwhelming hopelessness, repressed rage and grief and all that sort of stuff. No, usually what I find with a lot of people who have an insecure attachment, the DAs, the dismissive avoidants, usually wear their depression quite visibly and they often appear quite mute, disconnected. The fearful avoidants I find engage a lot in toxic positivity to avoid having to feel a lot of that intense shame and sadness inside of them. Whereas anxious attachers, now this is something that I find a lot with my clients, is often I find the depression we feel is something that comes up in sporadic moments where I find you might find from time to time, you experience sort of like a little dull ache in your heart where you feel just, misunderstood, lonely, sad. And you might have this recurring theme of feeling like a sad person, that no one loves you and no one treats you well. that's what I would call another dimension of depression. So, depression and insecure attachment do tend to go hand in hand, I find, even if the symptoms are not always overt or obvious. Plus, if you watch, I think her name is Dr. Judith, she does a lot of work on high-functioning depression, and I know a lot of my clients are very high-functioning and intelligent people, and I think that often at times, when you haven't really found your passion and purpose in life, many people, frankly, are not that happy with where they're at in life. They're, even if they have achieved great things, they've got a great title, they've got good money, they've got a great circle of friends, a lot of people just feel so disconnected from themselves. And that's what happens when a lot of us have faced, trauma, is that we're completely rudderless and we don't know where we're supposed to be going in life. So as a consequence, I would say those two things absolutely can connect. But it would depend from person to person, because it may not just be depression. Hell, this person could have bipolar. This person could have a personality disorder. So insecure attachment and the mental health stuff with mood disorders, personality disorders, absolutely can be a thing. And I don't think I need to tell anyone that anxiety is a huge recurring theme for insecure attachment. So yeah, great question. My dismissive avoidant told his fearful avoidant to go to therapy. He met me as I was going to therapy, but now when I said he should, he doesn't want to because he likes his life as it is. What do I say? Okay, in that moment, that's a great example of him not wanting to do it because he doesn't want to be controlled. A lot of avoidant attachers may share a bit of enthusiasm and optimism for therapy, but when they get hopeless again and deflate, that's it. They're not going to do it and they'll give up on future opportunities. If he doesn't want to go to therapy, I'm going to be honest, respect his wishes. You don't have the means to force him. But what you may want to consider is boundaries. And one of those boundaries might actually be saying, which might sound contrary to what I just said, but hear me out. You might have to say, babe, I love you, but with the issues that we're having at hand, whilst I'm taking accountability and responsibility for going to therapy myself, or I'm doing my own due diligence, I can't continue to be invested in a relationship where I'm also not having a partner who's working on their side of the street. If this continues, it's going to have a detrimental impact on how I'm feeling about being part of this relationship because I can't do this alone, especially when I'm the one working on myself and I don't feel like that level is being matched reciprocally. You're perfectly within your rights to say that. It'd just be like if you're dating someone who's got an addiction, you absolutely need to say, I love you, babe, but if we're going to continue this, you need to go to therapy to work on your addiction because I can't be dating someone who's in the throes of an addiction. Why? Because an addict's first love ain't gonna be you, it's gonna be their substance of choice. So it's a bit of an ultimatum-y sort of thing to say, I realize, but in this sort of case, I gotta tell you, when push comes to shove, if it's starting to get to a point where this is a real compatibility issue now, and you've been talking about it for a time, this is where things now need to come down to the wire, and you can say it lovingly and assertively. But as always, just be careful in knowing that it's not a silver bullet. It won't necessarily elicit change. It's better to see how they react off the back of it. Someone here has written, avoidance going to therapy is sometimes like people going to the gym and scrolling Instagram instead of working out. Well, yeah, that's pretty much true. All right, that person who actually was just asking about what should I tell this person who wants to go to therapy? They just said, I broke up with him. He wants to be buddies or friends now. The friend zone. Of course. The friend zone is a much safer place, and it also means he doesn't have to face rejection, and it means he can control the dynamic. Avoidance in the friend zone. That should be a theme. Well, I think it is. All right. How can an avoidant stay married for like 20 years? What makes him stay? His triggers aren't activated. An avoidant attacher can stay committed to a relationship? Absolutely. If it's not got any intimacy, if it's not got much depth, if their triggers aren't being activated, hell, if their partner's enabling it quietly. So many individuals date avoidant attachers where they're frightened out of their mind to speak up for themselves and say, hey, I want to talk about us. I want to talk about the relationship. They sort of just go through every milestone, marriage, kids, anniversaries. They live on the milestones and the euphoria that those moments bring just to sort of quieten the anxiety that's running inside of them. They then go on to pick up, coping mechanisms like drinking more, working more, doing anything like cleaning the house more just to avoid the discomfort of, I don't feel connected to my partner. So many people have not learned, because it was modeled, to speak up for the discomfort and the uncertainty inside of them when they're dating someone who is avoidantly attached. And in those cases, the avoidant attacher might be cheating on them. But that person still feels scared to even bring it up because they don't know how to articulate it. So in terms of a 20-year marriage, honestly, it could mean any number of things, but if the evidence is they couldn't even do a relationship with you and there was growing intimacy and depth, I think it's starting to show that maybe the 20-year relationship had different dimensions to it than yours did. Meaning it may not have set them off, or it may have been even an abusive relationship where they were dating an addict. They were dating someone with a personality disorder. Many of these individuals have grown up with people who are highly dysfunctional. That's what they're used to. Until they challenge that, that's their comfort zone. They're not budging. So that can happen a lot. All right, I'm going to try and speed run. Is ghosting a dismissive or a fearful avoidant tactic? Both. Both can do it. I think dismissives can do it more often, to be honest. Why is this breakup so painful? How do we stop blaming ourselves and the self-hate for being rejected? Oh, that's a question that I can I can answer for days, but I'm going to do my best to keep it simple. I think the reason why these breakups hurt so much is because it's blindsiding. There's betrayal, there's abandonment, and usually when you're dating someone like this, most of us, generally speaking, don't have such flip-flops of emotions when we're getting to know an individual. We usually gradually appreciate someone over time, right? And we're not suddenly changing from I like this person to I'm freaked out, I'm not good enough for this person, I can't give them what they're looking for. I think a lot of us are still very much in the throes of a honeymoon phase, and to have that cut off very abruptly, I think is so devastating for our nervous system because we often feel like we've lost out on a future, potential, the love of our lives. And even people who are married or in long-term relationships with avoidance, because a lot of these issues, these things that would actually evolve a relationship are never really addressed because, avoidant attachers is very conflict averse. They're sort of in the first chapter of their relationship that never sort of grows out of it. So even as this person says here, I was made to feel like I was thrown away like a piece of trash after being promised the world. A lot of, and I think for a lot of you too, many of you may also coincidentally have had a lot of emotional neglect when you were younger without even knowing it. You may have come from, broken families. You may also have some developmental trauma. And so if you've got wounds of not being good enough, feeling like a bad person, feeling not chosen or unworthy, those buttons have just been pressed really damn hard, and you're going to have a lot of pain to deal with. So I think something to think about in this context is the fact that, you could be seriously, seriously hurting because of what's going on inside of you that you may not have even realized was going on there. You've also just been betrayed by someone who was basically selling you the world. But for the self-blame piece, inner critic. Usually in my experience, 9 times out of 10, that is an inner critic that's trying its best to help you understand the situation by saying things like, you weren't good enough for them. You aren't pretty enough for them. If you did more of this back at that moment, maybe they wouldn't have left you. If you only hadn't brought up the status of the relationship, they'd still be here right now. Your inner critic, though annoying as fuck, is trying to help you. It's trying to help you make sense of a nonsensical situation. And many inner critics are born from being exposed to people who are bullies, abusive individuals who have not treated you right. That inner critic was probably part of your survival, it was part of your cognition growing up. And even though its role is well and truly outdated in this case, you have to challenge that line of thinking, because even though it's trying to look out for you in its very misguided way, you need to present the facts and be like, is this true? Are the stories I'm telling myself about this person necessarily accurate? Much of the time you'll realize it wasn't. So yeah. All right. I can see someone here says, it is draining when the dismissive or fearful avoidant made the breakup your fault. It feeds the inner critic. It does. And it really is one of those things where it's so important to be mindful of when your inner critic is feeding on this. You know, a great example of this, you know, I don't know if any of you watch or, you know, view the episodes of Ken Reads, but I had a client the other day say to me something like, on one hand, I am increasingly becoming confident that I am not at fault, but this little voice inside of me that's still ticking away keeps saying to me, well, we weren't in a relationship. That means they weren't avoidant. All these other stories were about long-term relationships. You just were with someone who didn't really like you. That's a great example of when an inner critic is looking for anything to try and shut you down, because it's trying to basically make it your fault. Now, why would it be trying to do that? Oh, that's right, because it's trying to give you a sense that if you fix yourself, you'll have control over what's going on. And where would it have learned that? Oh, that's right. If you had really, you know, maybe problematic people around you, whether it's school or in your family home, because when you learn, or when you've learned that if you fix yourself for disagreeable people and get their love, then you might think that by changing and amending yourself that you'll be able to get that person's love. And I'm here to just tell the inner critic, no amount of bending yourself like a pretzel is ever going to appease a person who cannot accept you for who you are. And when you feel as though your inner critic is trying to give you something to hold on to be like, if you fix your looks, if you were in a relationship, if you had said X, Y, Z, it's giving you a false sense of control. It's giving you this idea of, if I could have X, Y, Z, A, B, C, then I could fix this. Let me tell your inner critic this, from me to them. You're not going to. There is no fixing this. There is no resolving this. It's game over. What are you going to do? Give them, you know, like, are you going to transform yourself, have a glow up off the back of this? A lot of people do. A lot of people come out of this looking more, you know, athletic and lean off the back of these experiences in the hopes that it'll actually give them not only revenge bod, but also a sense of control over the situation. And I'm here to tell you, good, you know, great for your physique and also for your athleticism, but your avoidant attachment doesn't give a shit about that. I mean, sure, they might be, you know, attracted to that from like a, you know, an external validation piece. They might be like, oh, that's hot. But that was not the issue in the first place. And if they break up with you again, it's not because you need to now have a 6-pack or worse, go to an 8-pack. It's because they can't handle intimacy and closeness. So, you know, the more you know, I'd say the more you try and transform yourself for these people, the more it's just going to hurt and the more you're going to beat yourself up. So please do yourself a favor. Have a chat with the inner critic. Show it the facts. Easier said than done. Maybe best with a therapist. But just understand that's not your responsibility to fix. All right, last question. I think I've answered this one. Someone just wanted to know what makes a boomerang fearful avoidant more likely to come back or not for another cycle. Great question. I actually answered that at the beginning of the live, so I'll do that one later. I'll do that one later. I'll skip that one on the basis that I feel like I've answered that one at the beginning of the live, and you can watch it when I post it. Someone here has asked, big question, how can an avoidant marry a narcissist they barely know after abruptly leaving you and look so happy throughout social media? They act like we don't even exist anymore. Does this mean they got a free pass to escape guilt, loss, and accountability for how they treated us badly? What a great question. Oh, that person's previous question was like, sorry, I missed the beginning. It's okay. You asked a really good question. I'm just short on time and I just wanted to keep going. This is such a good question. Okay, so just to reiterate, your ex has now gone on to date a narcissist. I'm presuming a known narcissist. And they look like they're having their best life on social media. And the rest of the question was, do they basically get a free pass to escape guilt, loss, and accountability for how they treated us badly? Okay. I'm very excited to answer this question. So let me start by saying this. Firstly, for an avoidant attacher to go to a person who is narcissistic, especially if they know that person's trouble, or even if they've trashed that person, because a lot of avoidants trash their exes who were problematic to them and then they return to them. That says a lot about them. That says that they don't have good boundaries, they haven't learned anything, and they seem to enjoy being around with abusive people who they've bitched and moaned about. So that's one thing. Secondly, how could they do this? Simple. It's more comfortable than having to face themselves. You got to remember that narcissists and avoidance often share some very similar themes, one of which is insecurity, not to mention inauthenticity. I mean, insecure attachers also share inauthenticity and insecurity too, but avoidant attachers are more likely to blend with narcissists on the basis that narcissists will continue to forever shit on their avoidant partner to, make them feel like a piece of crap. Avoidant attachers have a lot of shame about who they are and how they feel about themselves. And so as a consequence, this is like going back to like for like. This is their comfort zone. This is what feels normal for them. And they often feel guilty and a sense of obligation to these people who have big personality disorders as well too. Now, as for the final part, do they get to basically escape this and, go off into the wind happier than ever? No. Do you know how damn painful it is to be in a dynamic like this? You got to think about it like this. People with insecure attachment are no stranger to relational stress. And even though stress in and of itself is not always a bad thing, relational stress will eat you alive. I have heard of accounts of, these couples, which are so common. Avoidant dad, narcissistic mum. That's a stereotypical cliche, but it's a very common pairing where, one of those people usually develops serious health issues, usually both, and they also are not functional in having, a good relationship with the kids at all. The kids will always feel not good enough and they don't connect to the dad in this example that I've created. And I have to say that many of these individuals often really do suffer from tremendous, shame and guilt that may eat them alive, where they're constantly trying to push this down until one day they might have a bit of a rock bottom where they just, they're not able to suppress those feelings anymore and they get overwhelmed and flooded with all the pain and shame of what they've done. And then they quickly try and, suppress those feelings again. But, this is a very, very common dynamic, a narcissist and an avoidant attacher. Very common. And frankly, it's not one that's going to be built on peace, stability, harmony, health. It's going to be based on chaos. It's going to be based on drama. It's also going to be based on passive aggressiveness and also a lot of pain. It's going to be replaying trauma from their childhood. Usually the avoidant attacher will feel like they're dating their mum. And for the, narcissist, they're probably going to feel like they're, being abandoned again by a parent. So there's that. And then finally, the social media stuff. Impression management. Anyone can make their social media look great. They can show off their marriage, their kids. Look at us, we've got a great looking life. But pictures online are not evidence of the mental and emotional well-being of a person and what's going on. You've got to understand that you cannot use social media as a basis for someone's mental and emotional well-being. The other day I had a client say to me, "Oh, you always look so put together." As a human being with my own set of insecurities and challenges, I show up how I want to show up on social media. I'm very deliberate about not talking about my personal stuff online because I don't want anyone to know about it. I show a slice of myself on here for a very professional reason. So, if social media is just happy photos, look at us going on holidays, we're so happy together, happy couple, here's the ring, you're only getting slices of what's being shown up on social media. So just as a gentle reminder, please do not use your ex's social media, their happy looking relationship, as the basis for how their mental health is. Many people often look happy online when they are struggling the most. And it can be the basis for a whole bunch of misunderstanding and misinterpretations about what's going on. And then there was one other part to this too, which I thought was important. Why do they act like, the previous relationship never even existed? because they can't handle what happened. It's too hard for them. They don't want to acknowledge the shame. They would much rather fabricate and make this entire experience go to bed than to actually sit with what they've done. So please be careful that you're not relying exclusively on the way they portray this, because this is their way of us trying to compartmentalize, not deal with their emotional stuff. This is the story they're communicating, even if it's not an intentional one. This is their way of managing their emotions. Last thing I want to say, which is my little cheat sheet for understanding avoidant attachers. A lot of you, I think, sometimes look to avoidant attachers and try and imagine, well, if, what would I do if I was this person? Like, why would I do that? Don't recommend that approach, because that's projection. 2, you often look at it from a very rational lens sometimes. A lot of you sometimes will come to me and be like, oh, are they doing this because they're seeing someone on the side? They're busy with work, so that must be the reason they're not messaging me. Maybe they're a bad texter. Drop those lines and thoughts from your vocabulary forever. Please, get rid of them. When it comes to the whole, they must be a bad texter, nobody is a fucking bad texter. Just drop that. If someone is a bad texter, there is a underlying reason for being a bad texter. And this is my little cheat sheet. What is the emotion driving the behavior? The bad texting, overwhelm. They don't like necessarily dealing with a lot of incoming messages. Now that can be for a variety of reasons. That could be neurodivergence, that could also be attachment stuff, that could be a whole bunch of things. But in some cases, it may be a case of they can't deal with a lot of incoming messages, so there's overwhelm there. As for why are they always busy? Well, what's the emotion? Maybe escapism. Maybe they're trying to avoid stuff because it allows them to avoid having to deal with things. Is this person potentially seeing someone on the side? We don't know, unless we have facts for it as well too. But generally speaking, if you look at the way avoidants behave, the dominant themes are anxiety, shame. And if you can sort of spot where that behavior is coming from, particularly with overwhelm as well too, you'll become a little bit quicker at being like, oh, I can see what's going here. Their behavior in ghosting is because they feel shame. They also don't feel like they've got the ability to communicate without feeling hurt or rejected. If you also look at it from the lens of why would they do this to me if they said they really cared? Then maybe go to the emotional piece and go, okay, well, if they're behaving badly with me, why would they be doing that? It's not because they never loved me. It's because maybe for them, this is all they know how to do. This is their capacity. And for them, they're freaking out. So it gets a little easier over time. And also when you do some inner work, you'll also understand why you're motivated to do things. The more you work on your own stuff and see the emotional stuff that's driving your stuff, you'll be like, oh, I can see why you're doing that. And it becomes so much easier to be like, yeah, I get this. All right. Everybody, thank you for what has been a wonderful experience reading out the first batch of letters. If you would like to submit a letter for Ken Reads, there's, I think, 4 more slots available before I close the November batch. There are 125 Australian dollars for a letter reading. And Serena, if you're still here, thank you so much for submitting your letter today. I hope that you had I hope you enjoyed and got value out of this. And congratulations again on saying no to your avoidant ex. And I will be back for my holidays. Before that, I'm going to be back from Olivia Rodrigo, so I can't wait for that. And yeah, I hope everyone got some value out of this. And if you're new to this live, you can always watch it when I post it as well too. All right, goodbye everyone, and thank you very much for a great last few months. And I'll be back for the next season of Ken Reads.